Hi everyone, welcome back to Mom and Podcast. Like we mentioned in the last episode, we are doing a couple of episodes where you get to know us a little bit better. So yesterday we talked about my story, and today we are going to talk about Jessie. So without further ado, here is her story. Hi Jessie.
Hi.
So let's start with telling us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you live, what you do for work, your kids.
Yeah, so I'm Jessica. I have two kids. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son. I'm married for, this is my 6th year. We'll be married for 6 years this October. It's hard to remember sometimes. To a great man named Sean. We have been living in Washington, D.C. And a suburb of D.C. for about 10 years, and recently came back to the Twin Cities during COVID. We are currently living with my parents, so it's gotten to be a lot closer since we're all in quarantine together. And I have a background in healthcare communications. I've worked both in nonprofits doing communications and also did some time at a PR agency focused on healthcare clients. I really love the communications field. And sort of as a result of COVID, I'm now home with my two kids. Just really was in a bit of a job transition, and then COVID started, and really, like a lot of people, realized that with the two really young kids, it was very challenging to not have a care provider for them, and so I'm a stay-at-home mom right now currently, and also doing this podcast.
Yes, that's right. And how did you decide we're ready for kids?
So Sean and I, we always knew that we wanted kids. It was something that we talked about from really early on in our relationship. We've had kids' names picked out for quite some time. But I originally thought, okay, well, I'm not really wanting to start trying to have a family until I'm, in my 30s. Especially in DC, it's a very career-oriented place, and a lot of people wait until they're a little bit older to have kids, and I felt like that's what I wanted to do. And then after we got married, pretty quickly something shifted, and I was very ready, and my husband was very ready as well. So we waited until we got married, and then did a honeymoon about a year and a half after we got married. So it wasn't until after we did our honeymoon that we were like, okay, let's start trying. Let's start building our family.
Awesome. And did you talk about how many kids you wanted?
We did. I think my husband has always said he's wanted about 4 kids. I was always on the 2 to 3 track. We have 2, and I think he would still like more. I had hard pregnancies, and I am not willing to do that again. But we both really love the idea of fostering and are very committed to trying to make that happen at some point in the future. It's a little hard during COVID to start that, and when our kids are so young, I think we're both thinking that we want to wait until they're a little bit older so we'd have the time and energy to devote to other kids in need. But that's something we both definitely feel pretty passionate about doing eventually.
And tell us more about your pregnancies.
Yeah, so with my daughter, my first pregnancy, it's funny because I assumed that I would have a hard time getting pregnant. I don't know why. And, I had some girlfriends that went through struggles, so I assumed it would be a challenge. So, I got pregnant really quickly and wasn't expecting that. And I didn't have the disillusion that pregnancy would be really easy, but I also didn't expect it to be what it was. So I had hyperemesis, which is the severe morning sickness, or as some call it, the Kate Middleton syndrome, where you are really nauseous or vomit a lot during pregnancy, often to the point of being dehydrated. Sometimes you need hospitalization. And so I threw up almost every day, multiple times a day. I started the medication, the diclegis, which was a godsend, but it didn't, it helped me get through the day. It miraculously helped me not feel as nauseous during the workday. About 15 weeks in, it started working, where I wouldn't feel as nauseous during the workday, but immediately when I would get home, I'd be throwing up the rest of the night. And that lasted until probably well farther than halfway through my pregnancy. Actually, I carried a Gatorade bottle with me because I would take public transportation, and so I would carry an empty Gatorade bottle with me so that I could throw up into it and not have people notice me, or not have to like try and run to the bathroom, or not be able to make it to a bathroom, especially when you're, really pregnant and waddling around. So that was a pretty big struggle, and I wasn't expecting that. And about 34 weeks into pregnancy, 32 or 34, around there, I started getting this insane itching on my hands and my feet at night, especially. And I'm talking, I was up all night itching. And so I called my midwife and I said, can I take a Benadryl or something? It's just, I don't know what this itching is. I assumed it was normal, just another effective pregnancy. And I had left a voicemail for her, and she called me back pretty instantly and said, you need to get into the hospital right away. We need to monitor you. There's a pretty serious condition that this could be, and you need to come in right away, and you need to be prepared to be induced today. And I was working on a really big project at work, and I remember saying, I was so shocked by it that I remember saying to her, oh, like, can it wait until 5? Because in my head, I'm like, well, I have this project to finish, and I didn't think it could be that serious because it was itching. And she said, no, you need to get in. So I went in, and she told me about this condition called cholestasis of pregnancy. It's essentially that your liver isn't regulating your bile acids correctly, and it's kind of like spilling into your bloodstream, and it can impact your baby. It doesn't really impact the mother in any way other than the itching, but it can cause your child to be stillborn. It can cause early delivery. So a lot of issues with the baby. And, I went in and was admitted and monitored. And I remember I really didn't think it was going to be a big deal. So I told my husband, well, don't come with me. This is going to be silly. And I was there, I think just maybe like half a day. And she came, the blood draw came back, and she said everything was fine. I was cleared to go home. But it was about a week later, I got a call from the midwife on a Saturday, and she said, I talked to the maternal fetal medicine doctor, and the thing with this condition is that the symptoms often precede the rise in the bile acids. So before you actually show that you have the cholestasis, your symptoms could be presenting, so you actually do have it, and it's just not showing. So they said they're going to treat me as if I had it and plan to be induced at 37 weeks. And she said, be prepared that now you're going to have to go to the hospital twice a week for a stress test, and just make sure that the baby's doing okay. And she followed that up with, the problem with the stress test is that the baby can go into distress at any minute with cholestasis. So even if your stress test looks fine, when you do it an hour later, things could go really south. So it wasn't totally reassuring, but also there's not much more you can do. So, the itching continued. They do give you Ursidile, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, to help manage the bile acids, but it doesn't. I've heard for some people it can help the itching, but it certainly didn't help it for me. And I was still up every night. So every night around 9 p.m., I would take one of those, those trays that you use, those foil trays to bake a turkey in. We happened to have an extra one, even though it was spring and summer when I was experiencing the symptoms. And I would fill it with ice and water, and I would put my feet in it, and I would stay up all night watching TV because there was no sleeping with it. So if you're pregnant and you have extreme itching on your hands and your feet, please tell your doctor, because it's potentially indicative of something more serious. So between those two things, it was challenging. There wasn't a moment in my pregnancy where I really felt comfortable. Another symptom of cholestasis is the severe upper right quadrant pain. So it constantly felt like someone was just stabbing me in the ribs. So there was no really getting comfortable. It was just a lot of random things, extreme carpal tunnel, and just a lot of those other things. I just did not enjoy pregnancy as a rule. And with my son, I don't think I had hyperemesis. If I did, it wasn't nearly as bad as the first time. I didn't vomit as much. I just felt more nauseous. I did have cholestasis again, and I did have it come on earlier, which is apparently quite common. They say that if you have cholestasis in your first pregnancy, I think it's between 60 and 90% chance that you'll have it in subsequent pregnancies. And a lot of women seem to say that it comes on earlier and stronger. So I did have it with my son again, which was unfortunate, but knew what to expect this time and was actually prepared. I had joined a Facebook group that I highly recommend if you do have it, because it was really encouraging to see other women talk about it and get some support. And so I knew what to expect, and I knew that we probably would be having another 37-week baby, which was just a little bit easier knowing the second time that was more likely, because it all happened really quickly with my daughter, and I don't think I felt like I had a chance to sort of catch my breath and realize what was going on. But on the flip side, I guess I also didn't really have time to consider how serious it was, which maybe was a blessing. So yeah, not great pregnancies, but I have 2 healthy, wonderful children, and that's really all that matters.
Yes, but doesn't make that all easier. For sure, those sound like really rough pregnancies.
They were not the most fun. I'm sure it wasn't the most pleasant to be around during that also, but it yeah, not the best.
It's not saying they're not worth it, but doesn't make it easier during the time. And were you and your husband scared during either of those, or how did that feel to be told that information?
I remember when the midwife called me with my first pregnancy. My husband was taking a timed exam for his grad school program, and I remember not being able to tell him for an hour, so I cried in my daughter's nursery thinking, is this baby gonna come to be? Because I just found out that she could be stillborn. But it made us both really worried, and I think we were also relieved that they were taking it so seriously, and we felt like we were getting such guidance and such care. And now, being a part of that Facebook group and talking to other women, I see that a lot of women with this condition really have to fight to be taken seriously, because it's not super common, and it's not as well known, it seems, by some OBs and some midwives. So I'm really grateful that I felt like I had people guiding me and telling me what to expect and making it seem like they had a plan for me. So we felt reassured, and I think I was a little worried about the induction, but I kind of was on the flip side thinking, I know when this baby's coming, and that's kind of awesome. Like, I can plan for it. I know that I'm going to go get a pedicure the day before and take that day off of work, and that part felt kind of nice, I guess, in a way. Like, the unknown, at least in that regard, was taking it off my plate.
That makes sense, especially so you didn't have to worry about finishing another work project. Just
kidding.
I think it's funny how we think. We just are like, no, I don't need to come in right now.
Right.
And then do you want to talk at all about your first baby had to be in the NICU shortly after coming home. So it was kind of a whirlwind after all of that. Do you want to talk about that at all and what that was like?
Yeah, that was very hard. So she was born, she was a 37-week baby. The induction only took less than 24 hours, actually. It was a pretty quick one. And her bilirubin was reading slightly high in the hospital, and they said it was borderline that they felt comfortable discharging us. But she was born on a Thursday, and we were discharged on a Friday. So I had a pediatrician lined up, of course, and I called him over the weekend, and I said, I want to make sure, do I need to be seen? I don't know if breastfeeding is going well. I can't tell. I had some struggles in the hospital, and I had seen the lactation consultant there a couple of times, and she had given me some great tips, but I couldn't really tell if she was eating enough. I had never done it before. Breastfeeding was so foreign, and I just didn't know. So we were discharged, and I called the pediatrician, and he said, it sounds like things are going okay. Why don't we have an appointment scheduled for Monday? So the weekend went by, and I brought her in on Monday, and she was the sleepiest baby. She never cried really those couple of days. She was asleep all the time, and I had to wake her up to eat. So I didn't think the eating was going great, but I didn't know how bad it was going. The appointment on Monday, my mom came with me, and the doctor said, she looks a bit yellow, so I just want to prepare you that we might have to have her do one of those at home lights, or she might have to be admitted into the hospital. So just to prepare you. And they did a blood draw there and told me, expect a call from us later today with the results. So I got the call later that afternoon from our pediatrician, and they said her bilirubin is extraordinarily high. You need to get her to the hospital immediately. So I called my husband. I said, I'm bawling, and I said to him, we have to bring her back to the hospital. I don't know what to do. And my parents were staying with us, and my husband was at his office. So he said, okay, I'll meet you there. We rushed into the children's hospital, and we had to go through the ER, but luckily our pediatrician had called ahead. So they took her bilirubin again there, and I didn't know what the number was at the time. I just know that she was being admitted to the NICU, and they said, okay, well, you need to pump because, we can't nurse her. She needs to be under the lights, which I had never done before. I had no idea how to pump. Luckily, Megan was there with me and showed me how to do it because I hadn't done it ever before. So they brought her up to the NICU. It was a beautiful hospital. It was really like the nicest nurses, the nicest doctors. And I remember it was probably about 10 p.m. before I actually had a chance to speak to one of the NICU doctors. And she said, okay, this is a situation. Your daughter's bilirubin, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was 22.5 or something like that. And she said, and at 23 is when she needs a blood transfusion, and she'd be admitted for 3 weeks. So she said, we're hoping that it's going down now that she's under the lights and you're pumping, and we can make sure that she's getting the right amount, but we're just going to take it day by day and see where her numbers go. But we fully expect them to go down, and her diapers to be wet and, pooping. So I remember her saying, she gave me this really rough paper towel because she couldn't find a tissue. And I just remember her saying, the situation is really rough, both this tissue and the situation. I remember thinking, okay, it's going to be fine. Like, we have this lovely doctor who's nice and funny, and it's going to be okay. She ended up being there for 5 nights, and it was, it's not ideal. You just give birth, and I had a really easy delivery. I'm really grateful for that, and I was recovering really well, so that was all good. But spending those 5 nights sleeping in the NICU in a chair, I think there was one chair and one little chair that folded out into be a bed, but my husband and I both stayed there every night, so it wasn't super comfortable, but obviously exactly where we needed to be. And it was, kind of great to get some extra support, but also awful to see my newborn baby under these lights and have all these tubes. And I think the hardest part was seeing her with this little IV strapped on. She's this tiny little baby, and I felt like there was nothing I could do for her. And I also felt like I had failed her because, we were home for 3 days or 2 days, 2 or 3, and I was the one that called the doctor. And obviously something I said made him think that it was going okay with breastfeeding, and we could have been seen, but we weren't. And, it wasn't my choice necessarily, but I must have given the impression that everything was going well enough. So I feel like it could have been prevented, and it was a lot of guilt to feel like I had let her down and jeopardized her health, and, being that close to needing a blood transfusion that early in life was it was just scary, and feeling like, am I not equipped for this at all? Because clearly I missed how serious things were. So that was really challenging. But she was released, happy, healthy, and she ate well from that point going forward. So I think we got really lucky, and it's just funny, I had never thought of jaundice as a serious thing. I knew nothing about it up until the point of having her, and now I hear that a baby's jaundice, and my nerve endings stick. I'm like, well, it's probably not serious, because most babies I hear about that have it, it's easy and quick, but it was a little scary for us. And I think when my son was born, because I had that experience with my daughter, I think the pediatricians were a little weirded out by me because every time they came, I would say, well, how's his bilirubin? Or how was his poops? How is this going? What's going on? And they were always, until I clarified and explained why, they said, well, that's fine. Everything's fine. The levels are normal. And once I explained, the doctor actually said to me, oh, well, I thought it was weird that you kept asking when we kept saying it's fine, but now it makes a lot more sense. So, like I said, everything turned out fine, but it was scary for sure. And I hadn't realized until the NICU lactation consultant told me that babies born prior to 38 weeks aren't always great at latching, and that's something I had no idea about. And I was a little upset because we had asked at the appointment when we found out we were being induced, if there were any issues or concerns to be aware of with a baby born, preterm. Not premature, but preterm. And no one brought that up to me, so I just wasn't aware. But my daughter also had a tongue tie, so I think there were just a lot of factors that fed into it. And, it worked itself out just fine, but was not the easiest at the time.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. And I think it also kind of just highlights how much we sometimes fail new moms and new parents, because a 37-week baby doesn't always feed as well. Sometimes they do really well, but a lot of times those babies need extra support just for a few weeks. Not in the NICU, just with feeding and latching. And I just feel like that's something that highlights that wasn't your fault. Everyone else should have helped you see that.
Right. And now I can so see that. And I have had a couple of friends who were induced early, and so I've just told them that ahead of time. But at the time, you don't know, and you are your child's biggest advocate, and you're the one that's supposed to protect them and take care of them. So it can feel like a lot. But yeah, I think we need to, especially people who have babies that are born a little early, knowing that that's normal and that that's okay and not your fault it's reassuring.
Yes, exactly. And if we just increase our support for moms,
right,
since we discharge people so much earlier than we used to.
Right.
But no one at fault there, just a system issue.
Right.
Well, that all sounds like a lot. How did you ever decide you wanted a second baby? After all that.
I didn't for quite some time, and I told my husband after that I really wasn't sure that I wanted to have another child, at least biologically, because it was really stressful, and I knew the stats of having cholestasis again, and I knew that I had a really challenging time after my daughter was born. Emotionally, I didn't realize at the time that I had some postpartum anxiety and depression, and I just sort of chalked it up to being a new mom. But I really struggled with feeling that I was maybe meant to be a mom. And I remember so clearly one night in the middle of the night nursing her and saying to myself in my head, I'm like, she deserves better than me, and she might be better off without me. And not with the thought of me wanting to hurt myself, but with the thought of maybe I should leave, like maybe I shouldn't be here, and not for any other thought than she would be better off. So I really struggled and had a hard time with that. And my marriage went through a hard time after she was born, and I think a lot of people's do, but nobody prepared me for how hard our marriage would be, because having a child and being exhausted really brings a lot of issues to light. So I just really had a hard time with the after period and feeling like I was giving her everything that she needed, and feeling like from that onset that I had sort of failed her. So I struggled with the idea of having to go through that again, because I did eventually find a therapist and address those issues and identified it as what it was, which was important and helped me see that we're great together, and she's we're lucky to have each other. But I was scared to go through that period again, because eventually with her I got into a great stride, and I loved having a daughter and just loved being with her, and I was scared to ruin that dynamic and that comfort level that I had finally found. But, I love having a sister, obviously, enough that we're doing a podcast together. And I wanted her to have a sibling. And I know I kind of felt ready again right after she was around 2, which I think is pretty normal from what I understand. So I think I just maybe needed some space. And one day I said to my husband, okay, I think I'm ready to start trying for number two. And so, like I said, I got pregnant really quickly with my first, not as quick as my second. We had a couple of chemical pregnancies before him, but it was just the right timing and it was the right situation, and we knew that we wanted our family to be bigger and we wanted our daughter to have the joy of a sibling.
And just to circle back on postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, I think that's so important. And I think it's so sad when we hear moms say that, because what more but does a baby need but their mom and dad? But I think that's a common thing that women say, and a key sign to that. Is there anything that helped you realize that you needed to support, and anything you could tell someone who maybe isn't sure if they're struggling with postpartum depression or anxiety?
Yeah, I think just recognizing if you don't feel like you, and I know that's hard because you don't feel like you after you have a baby, but feeling, for me, I didn't get help for a long time after I had that initial thought, and it wasn't until I was still crying a lot and still feeling like it was hard to live. And again, not for me, it wasn't that I wanted to hurt myself, it was just that it felt like too much. And I finally just realized like that it could be easier. Like maybe if I spoke with someone, I could feel better and I could enjoy this phase of life more and enjoy. I think again, it was going back to my daughter deserves more. Maybe I should see someone to start feeling that I am giving her my best self, because this isn't that version of me. And so finding a therapist, and it was pretty quickly after I spoke. I mean, on the first session, she said, well, I think you have some postpartum depression. And that was just hearing that was helpful, thinking, okay, well, it's not just that I'm going to be miserable forever now. Like, this is something that I can work on and get help for. So I just think realizing that it's not anything that you've done, it's just a very common thing that happens to so many women, and your life could be better if you get help, and it could be beneficial for you. So, and also there's just no harm in ever talking to someone. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is that you speak to someone and you find out maybe you don't have postpartum depression, but it can't hurt to get a second opinion or get any opinion.
Certainly, and I think anyone could benefit from therapy, whether or not they officially meet criteria for that diagnosis, adjusting to the huge life change of children.
Absolutely.
And finding help and getting help is a strength, not a weakness. So if anyone is feeling like they need some support, there are so many resources. You can reach out to your OB, your children's pediatrician should know someone. And then also, you just mentioned chemical pregnancies during that too. Is that anything you want to talk about?
Right. It was not easy. It was something I wasn't expecting. Like I mentioned, I got pregnant pretty quickly and pretty easily with my first child. And I sort of had the expectation that it would be the same way the second time around, which I know it's not, because I know a lot of people go through secondary infertility, but in my head, it made sense the first time it happened so easily. It, of course, is going to happen easily the second time. But, and to clarify, for our situation, it still was relatively easy. It didn't take that long after those 2 chemical pregnancies to get pregnant again. So I appreciate so much how lucky we were in that way. But we did have 2 of those, and I remember for the first time I put out, my husband came home from work, and so I had made this little cookie that said, Dad times 2, and we were so excited. And I don't know if anyone else is obsessed with taking pregnancy tests, but I was for my first, and I was those times 2, and I just wanted to see that line getting darker or make sure that it was still there. I think because I had had some friends go through situations, and I just felt like it was reassuring to see that line getting darker, and it was not getting darker, it was getting lighter. So I had a wonderful OB. He's now retired, but I had a wonderful OB who instantly said, well, let's just get you in for a blood draw and let's just see. And the number was going down, so we knew that it wasn't going to come to fruition, which it was really hard. And I think it was really hard because, one, I hadn't told anyone besides, a couple close friends in my family. And I also just wasn't able to fully express to my husband how much of a loss it felt to me. I think there's hormones that go into it, and you see the pregnant mark and you're already planning, you're preparing for another child. And so for me, it just felt really hard to know that even if it was for a second, there was a baby and then it was gone. And it was challenging to know that at least that particular child that could have been was no longer. So it was hard. And it was another situation where you have this huge thing going on and no one knows because no one can see it. I was at work when it happened, when I got the results, and also when I started to bleed both times, and you just stayed at work and kept going and just kept about your day. And that seems so strange to know that this huge loss just happened and business as usual. So it was really hard, but I know that so many women go through it, and I had friends that I could reach out to that went through those experiences for support, and knowing that we could try again. And like I said, we got pregnant with my son, pretty quickly after, so I felt very lucky. But it was also a little scarier knowing that the loss could happen. So I was grateful that my OB had me coming in for blood draws pretty consistently, and I was getting that reassurance that things were okay. But, then I did get spotting with him too, and it was somewhat similar to when I had those chemical pregnancies, and I got extraordinarily nervous. So it was a bit more of a roller coaster carrying him and just being a bit more worried about it, which was just sort of a theme throughout his pregnancy because I was more aware of the cholestasis and the risk that it brought with him. And he was a breech baby, and turned out it was because the cord was wrapped around his neck. I mean, there were things with him that, and I think just knowing how important and how precious, now that I was a mother, that life was to me, that I felt so much more protective and so much more anxious of the thought of something happening than I did the first time, because it came so easy. And I don't think, maybe not that I didn't appreciate it, but that I didn't have any expectations of it going any other way but through a healthy pregnancy and a healthy delivery.
And that makes sense. And it's hard. And I've heard that a lot from women, that after a miscarriage, it's a lot harder to feel calm. Well, thank you for sharing. That's hard to share and hard to remember and look back on, I'm sure.
Yeah, but like I said, 2 healthy, happy kids, and immensely grateful for that.
Well, let's shift gears to then how it was adjusting to bringing both those kids home once you had your older child, and she was 3 at the time that you had your second baby.
Yeah, it was something. I actually think that having my second child, at least in my experience, it wasn't as jarring of a life change because I was sort of in Kidville already, and I knew that those phases that were hard weren't going to last forever, and I just was already sort of in the mom zone. But my second child, my son, he was a much harder baby. My first daughter, like I said, she was pretty easy. She slept all the time. She rarely cried. I was feeling like I was rewarded for having a really awful pregnancy. I thought, okay, well, the world is giving me a really easy baby to make up for that. And with my son, I didn't know at the time, but he had some dietary issues, and he just cried and cried and cried. And if I wasn't holding him, he would scream nonstop, and he wouldn't sleep very easily. He had a lot of trouble eating in the beginning with latching, and he just wasn't gaining enough weight in the beginning. He was just a much harder baby, and I felt terrible for my daughter because that did divert a lot of my attention. And at the time we weren't living in a place where we had a lot of family support. We had a wonderful community of friends, but it's a little bit different. It's not the family who's going to come over and see you as often. And it was hard because I felt like she wasn't getting necessarily all my attention. But once we figured out his issues and sort of eased into, a new routine, it got quite a bit better. And she really had no interest in him, and I mean no interest, never wanted to hold him. She wasn't angry about him being there, but she really didn't want to acknowledge that he was there at all. I mean, from the moment that we brought him home, she was sort of like, "Oh, no, I don't want to be in his room. I don't want to touch him. I don't want to do anything with him." Which I felt was better than her hating him. It just, she actively wanted nothing to do with him. And we did settle into a good routine, and now she's obsessed with him, and it's awesome to see. And I'm so grateful that we made the choice to have another kid and give her that sibling. It was not easy in the beginning, but like I said, I think it's just easier once you've had a child to know that a lot of things will pass and things get better. So that was good, and it's nice to see them playing together and seeing that they have that bond.
Yes, that's so fun, and that's what I always think. Everything's a phase.
It is, and especially once I mean, like I said, the screaming stopped. It just, I felt like, who is this child? My first one was so quiet. I mean, when Nora woke up in the middle of the night, she would just look at you. She wouldn't make a peep, and Truman would just holler.
Yes, Nora was an abnormal baby in a nice way.
She was, yeah, she was this beautiful gift of an angel baby, yeah.
It's so rare. One time I had a patient, I think it was their third child, and they were both so worried. They said, she never cries. And that was their question. And I said, what's the problem? And they're like, there's something wrong with her. Like, it wasn't that she wasn't alert, but she never cried. And they were both so worried. I left that appointment just laughing with them because I was like, I think it's okay.
Right. It's okay. And you're so lucky.
Yes. And the baby was fine. But
right.
Certainly, of course, it would be concerning in a different light. But this baby was alert, just not crying, just like
right.
Nora.
Right. I mean, it was hilarious. And I don't know why I felt the need at the time. Why would I go and rush to pick her up even if she was just awake? But I remember just holding her in the hallway in the middle of the night, and we were literally just staring at each other. She wasn't making a peep. I could have just left her.
Oh my gosh.
First time moms. And yeah, with Truman, that was not an option.
Well, true me. Oh, and you mentioned during that, because you guys have kind of shifted gears during COVID, you mentioned that you didn't have support out in Maryland, and now you have somewhat relocated to Minnesota for the time being. How was making that decision during all of this, and how was moving your children and your family and everything for this time?
Yeah, I think we both recognize that it is so much more helpful to have family around and have a support system. Even though our quote-unquote pod in COVID is small, it's our parents and it's you and your family, and we're really lucky to have these people around. So it's turned out to be the best decision for our family because we have the additional support and we're surrounded by people that are willing to drop anything for us and help us. And it's a huge contrast to what we had before. And I mean, like I mentioned, we had wonderful friends nearby that really were our rocks and our support system, but it's different. Family is just different. And it's challenging to pick up and move your family to something new. But I think for us, we knew that we were coming to a place that would be much more of a support system, and it would be a place where our kids could get to know their family more and still be engaged with their cousins, which is awesome. So they still have a playmate, and it's been really a blessing for us. Like, we're very grateful that we made that choice.
And tell us about what your living situation looks like since March.
So we are living with our parents, and it's actually been great. I mean, like I said, we didn't have the support that we did, and we are a close family and a close extended family. So even though we lived in Maryland, we would come to the Twin Cities quite often to see, my parents and you are in your family, but it's not the same as seeing someone on a regular basis. So, my daughter knew her grandparents really well because of those visits, but she would always talk about, I want to see Grandma and Grandpa, or I want to see Asher. And they didn't have that on a regular basis. And so now, I mean, they wake up every day. My kids wake up, and some of the first people I see are grandma and grandpa. And they have such a closeness now. And, like I said, my daughter had that already, but my son didn't get to know them as well because he was born, and then my parents had come out maybe I think once for Thanksgiving, and we had come back once, but they didn't have as much time with them, especially because Nora is obsessed with them. And when they would see our kids, Nora would want all the attention. As I mentioned, she only recently started loving him, so she would want them to play with her in whatever game she wanted, and Truman wasn't really engaged in that, especially since he was so young. So it's been really awesome because, one, we have extra help, and two, that bond that they're creating is just unbelievable. And I think Nora is so loving having my parents and having them play, because they spoil her so much, and they just, and not necessarily with gifts, but spoil her with undivided attention. And they will play, kitty chase lion for hours, whereas I'm like, oh gosh, do we have to play kitty chase lion again? And so it's just really awesome that they're getting that, and that Truman is getting that time with them, because he hadn't previously. And it's been awesome. I mean, it's a bit strange to live with your parents again after living in a different state for 10 years. So that part is just a little weird, but it's been really fun. I mean, I'm binge watching How to Get Away with Murder with my parents every night. We're trying to zoom through it, and we're, playing games and having fun. And, it's probably the best situation I could ask for during quarantine. We're very lucky in that we all get along, and we have access to a lot of outdoor activities without having to engage with other people, so we can still social distance. And it's been really good overall, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yes, we're glad you're back.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's also really cool to see how our kids play with each other. I mean, they go into another room and they're fine, and they just want to play with one another, and they ask to be alone because they want to, literally, they say, we want to talk silly, or we want to do this. And I think they have a bond that they had before, but is so much stronger now. And it's so cool to see, because it's really neat to have that relationship with your cousins.
Yes, they also fight like siblings.
They do.
It's a roller coaster watching them play.
Yes, it is. But it's fun.
Yes, it's super fun. And then any tips, especially as you mentioned, we've been kind of doing the social distancing, and Sean, their dad, wasn't here for a while. Any tips for keeping a preschooler entertained?
Well, oh, gosh. Well, for my daughter, what I have found that really helped us, we didn't get into any sort of routine for a while. And at first, like I said, when I was still working a bit when I got here, so that was a little harder to get into a routine. And I know for so many working parents, it's just impossible because every day changes. But even having a loose structure of a routine helped us. And that started with sort of, okay, let's do educational stuff in the morning and then more play stuff in the afternoon. And keeping to that helped that expectation a little bit. And like I said, we didn't do that right away. So once I started, there was some growing pains, but I could see her losing everything she had learned. She couldn't identify letters as well. So I really wanted to make sure that we dedicated a little time every day. And once she sort of saw that and was able to expect that, that helped me a ton. And her, I think there were a lot less tears on both sides. So that helped. There's certainly some workbooks that we got. There's a lot of Paw Patrol workbooks and activity books. She really loves those activity books that have you do those little puzzles. So you help the elephant find its food, and you go through a maze. She loves that, but it also is helping her work on her, dexterity with her writing. So those kind of things have been helpful a lot. And I think just reasonable expectations, or minimizing expectations. I think a lot of us have had to do that in terms of, okay, we're used to having all these things in a certain way and all these systems set up, and all of our systems have been shattered. So just sort of letting go of this is how everything needs to be, and focusing on what we can actually allow things to be because of minimal time or resources or energy.
Totally. For us and the kids.
Absolutely.
And thinking about that, just looking back, I know your life has changed so much since pre-COVID, and I hate saying that, but basically that's what it is.
Right.
And so I know when I look back, I can now see things so much more clearly of what I didn't like before that maybe wasn't working well for our family. Is there anything that you've thought, I really want to change this? Hopefully someday as things shift back to returning to a little bit more of normalcy in terms of work and life.
Yeah, there's so many things. And I don't think I realized a lot about our routine and about how I constantly felt like I was in an adrenaline rush almost because things were go, go, go. I do not miss the morning rush. I do not miss having to remember every little thing to pack up. And it would be different now because I was still pumping and doing all that for my son, which I'm not at that point anymore. But that was awful, making sure that all the pump parts were washed at night and everything was ready to go the next day. But even without having the breastfeeding factor, it was a lot of rush. It was, getting up and going in the morning and trying to stick to that schedule and the commute. And I think even if we get back to a point where that is a thing again, I think trying to find a more manageable routine or trying to find a way to insert a bit more calm into it, because I know there were a lot of mornings when I was so short with my daughter because we had to get out of the house and go, and that's just life, and that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to cause any lasting damage, but I love being able to have a slightly slower pace of life. And I think so many of us, from the conversations I'm having with girlfriends, that's one positive that we're finding, is that it's a calmer state. And the expectation of not having to get up and get ready completely, I know a lot of people still have to, but for me, I'm not having to get up and worry about getting showered and ready and the dog fed and the dog walked and the kids fed and all of that. And so I think just finding a more of a balance, that thing that we've all been talking about for years, that unattainable balance, maybe we can find a way to make that a reality. And I think that's the hope for a lot of people, because if anything has come out of COVID, it's that we have unrealistic expectations of working parents especially, and maybe we're finally at a point where we can address that a bit more.
Completely. It's so brought that to light. And that morning rush.
That morning rush.
I do not miss that. I miss a lot of things, and I know I'm grateful that our family's in the situation we're in currently. I know there's a lot of you who probably are working and still having a morning rush, but I think for all of us, life has slowed down in a lot of activities, and it's just shifted. Like, maybe our kids don't always need to be doing something.
Right.
Or for each of us, we'll take something different away from that, but it's a good time to reflect.
Absolutely.
And then, what is your favorite part about being a mom?
There's so much. I love being a mom, and I think I love it so much. Maybe this is for everyone, but I love it so much now because I was in that sad state for so long after my daughter, where I felt like maybe it wasn't the right thing, and now I'm like, I love being a mom, and I think I'm really good at it most days. There's some days where I'm like, oh, I was not my best self. But I love playing with my daughter. I love seeing her learn things, and my son too, and I love seeing the joy on their face when they discover something, when they realize that they're capable of doing something. Seeing that excitement and that joy is so awesome. I think we've been spending so much time lately outdoors, and seeing both of their love for that is amazing, and their just natural curiosity, and my son's excitement at seeing a duck is unparalleled. It could be any animal. He raises both hands in the air like there was just a touchdown, and he is ecstatic. And so just seeing, I think, the joy and having their laughter is amazing. And I think just being able to comfort them and being a source of everything for them, which is on the flip side exhausting because of course it takes so much, but knowing that your child needs you for love and for growth and for just becoming the person that they are meant to be is so huge. And some days that feels overwhelming, but other days it feels like this huge honor that you've been given.
Definitely. And he's so cute. They're both so cute. Hopefully we all can find something we're as excited about as Truman is about a duck.
I don't think I could, but I hope to.
And then before we wrap up, do you have a good recent funny or cute kid story besides Truman and the ducks?
I do. If there is anyone listening who have kids in the background, it's not, there's some language advisory ahead, but we just recently started giving our kids baths together, and they are loving it, but my husband and I were giving them both a bath, and we asked Nora to switch spots with Truman because he kept playing with the faucet. And she said, "What's a faucet?" So we showed her, and about probably 2 minutes later, she started singing, "Fuck, fuck, fuckity, fuck, fuck, fuck me, fucky, fuck." And my husband and I just looked at each other, and I had to put the shampoo bottle in my front of my face. He had to smother his face into a towel. We were hysterically laughing, but we didn't want to give it too much weight, and she just kept singing along her little fuckity fuck fuck. And she suddenly stopped and said, "What are you guys laughing at?" We just said, "Oh, no, your song is just so nice, but what is about that toy over there that Truman's playing with to try and divert her?" But we were dying, and it took probably about a couple minutes for my husband he looked at me, and all of a sudden he goes, "Oh, faucet, that's what she's trying to say." But, it was, and he and I had been in a pretty heated argument minutes before. So it was the comic relief that we needed, but it was pretty great.
Totally. Oh, that's awesome. I was worried when you told me that story that she heard me drop an F-bomb, because I'm terrified that my children will after driving in the car with me sometimes.
And they probably will inevitably, but it's okay. No judgment.
No, I don't think Nora's heard me. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Any last words you want to say, or anything else you want to add?
No, just thank you all for listening. It's exciting to share our stories, and looking forward to hearing all of yours.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mommin'. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram at momandpodcast, or visit our website at momandpodcast.com. Make sure to tune in every week for new episodes with a great lineup of guests who are going to share their stories with you. Thanks for listening.